We're back. We're working on the 59 budget rat rod, 87 Thunderbird, chassis swap, body swap, whatever you want to call it, mashup. And we're back on the fun tilly bits. Last video we got this front suspension all fabbed up, the front bags all mounted up in there, new struts installed, and everything is working as it's supposed to. And now we're on to the rear part of the car. In this video, the goal is to get the rear part of the car also on bags, so that way we have the entire bag suspension all taken care of and working properly. We're gonna dive into that, see what it takes to get this car just a couple inches lower in the rear. Right now, the way the car sits, it is actually sitting pretty low already. It's currently sitting on the bump stops of the Thunderbird chassis, and it can't physically go any lower. But the problem is, I want this look to be about ride height, where it's tucking a little bit of the wheel, and it's tucking the tire, if you can imagine there was a tire on there. But when the car is parked, I want it to be able to air out and sit a couple inches lower, and really just tuck this top portion of the snowflake wheel. So since the car is sitting on bump stops, we're going to have to go through there and take those out, of course, and then see what we have to do to notch the frame or the subframe that's in the car, because this is a unibody car. We're going to have to see what is involved with notching it enough so that way it'll allow the axle to come up a little bit farther into the body and effectively lowering the car to the ground. It's not only the bump stops over the rear axle, there's a pinion snub that's also an acting bump stop that's in this part of this section of the floor underneath, of course. So we're gonna have to probably cut this section of the floor out so that way the diff center, it can actually come up. This is a solid axle car, so the center diff moves with the wheels, unlike a independent rear where the diff is solid mounted and the control arms on either side move independently. The front was simple to figure out. All we did was swap out the front struts. We were able to bring it an inch lower than it was sitting on the factory shock bump stops, as you can call them. And we got it so that way the K-member was sitting about a half inch or so lower than the bottom of the rim. So effectively, with some tires, it'll bring that K-member off the ground about an inch and a half or 2 inches. And then this way, if the car ever had an issue with the air system, I wouldn't be stuck beached on the ground and not be able to move the car. I'll still be able to drive it around, or at least roll it onto a flatbed or whatever. So I was just trying to plan ahead and make the car serviceable. So with the rear, the limiting factor is probably going to be how far the gas tank sits down. Of course, when I air this car down, I don't want the gas tank to be sitting on the ground. When I test fitted it before, it only hung a couple inches below the rear sill plate area here. Not enough to see it when you're standing back here and the car's more than likely on the ground. But if you look to the side, you can see the tank a little bit. We still had a couple inches to go before the tank was the same height as the bottom of the wheel. So in theory, we should be able to bring this rear an inch or two lower and still have gas tank clearance and not scraping on the ground. But if it comes down to it, when we get to that, and we get it so low that it just looks too good not to do that, we'll build a skid plate for the gas tank just to protect it for those oh shit moments. So that's not a big deal either way. With all that being said, we're going to get tearing into this rear end and kind of get an idea of what's going to be involved with getting this car a little bit lower in the rear. So the reason why we're going to have to cut apart this bulkhead for the rear upper control arms is with the car sitting on bump stops, which are those rubber triangle pieces right there. The control arm is at a super extreme down angle. When it does that, it causes the front diff to rack forward or to roll forward, and then it puts a big angle on the yoke and the U-joint of the drive shaft. When you lower the axle, that upper control arm now has an upward angle, and that's more so what you want. So you can get a better look at the upper bulkhead up here with the upper control arms. So hopefully this whole stamped steel can be cut out, and then I can rebuild the whole mounting system for those upper control arms, and then get a set of adjustable control arms so I can dial in that pinion angle. Well, the first things I like to do when I'm trying to figure something out is just take it all apart. Get all the junk that you don't need, like the unimportant things like shocks and sway bars and quad shocks, all that stuff you don't need. It's all just mumbo jumbo. It's in the way from making you try to figure stuff out. It really crowds the workspace, you know what I mean? All right, one thing we learned while cycling the suspension the first time was there was 2 limiting factors: the upper control arms and the bump stops. So I took those out, and so now we're going to cycle it again to see where the axle goes, and that way we can figure out what kind of modifications we need to do to make the upper control arms work and relocate the bump stops as well. So now we have a better idea of where we have to trim the floor. We're gonna have to trim probably around right where this crest rolls over up until this point here. There's gonna be a pretty good chunk that we're gonna have to take out because the diff comes up and wants to make contact with that. So we're gonna have to move all the brake lines, the ABS lines, and all that fun stuff. What's the worst that could happen? I mean, even if it's all wrong, we can always just weld that back in, no big deal. But I'm pretty confident that we have to take that big chunk out, and that'll allow the axle to go up that much farther. And then I think we're gonna just take this rear axle completely out, get that out of the way, move all the brake lines and fuel lines that we need to, and then we're gonna start cutting out that upper control arm bulkhead. All right, so kind of give you guys a better idea of what we're gonna be doing under here. The problem is when the axle goes all the way up, these upper control arm mounts are too low. So then it puts way too much angle on those upper front control arms. So what we're gonna have to do is raise these upper control arm mounts. In order to do that, this whole bulkhead right here, this 10-inch wide piece that goes across, it's only spot welded in a couple spots. And by that I mean a lot, but it's removable. So we're gonna have to cut this whole mount out of here, this whole bulkhead, this sheet metal here, this bracket, a couple of these brackets. We're gonna save these because they're the bolts for the rear seat belts. And then we'll have to put in a crossbar and fab up our own control arm mounts. And that'll correct the angle of the upper control arms. Also, I apologize if this video sucks because it's kind of hard to film underneath the car with not a lot of light, and most of this project is going to be under the car, so sorry in advance. We got the axle torn out, and we got all the necessary things cut out that were in the way of the axle going up any further. Took out a big chunk from the upper part of the rear trunk area, basically right where the axle, over the axle is going to be. So we clearanced that. The biggest thing we had to do was cut out the bulkhead, which, thinking back now, I should have cut that hole before I did this and cut out the suspension, because it would have made it a lot much easier. Because I spent hours cutting and cleaning that rear bulkhead out, so that was fun, I'll say that. But we got it done, and it'll be worth it in the end. So, like I said, we got that bulkhead all cleaned up. You can see right in this corner here kind of how much space that bulkhead was taking up. So there's probably about 4 inches in, maybe 3.5 inches of space that we gained going forward. So as we bring our control arms up, we're going to need that space to put a crossbar in and fab up some new mounts that are higher and farther forward. So right now we're going to put the rear axle back in, just temporary bolt it on the lower control arms to kind of locate it all. We'll jack it up and cycle it, see how far we can go up before that gas tank's going to end up just sitting on the ground, because obviously there's no point in going farther than the gas tank will allow it. And so we'll throw the wheels on, just kind of mock everything up, see what we're working with, and kind of get a gist on where we need to locate those upper control arm mounts. So after tearing it all apart, we're going to partially put it back together. All right, we got the axle back in and the tank mocked up and the wheels, everything's kind of bolted back up, just to kind of mock everything up and see what kind of where we're at height-wise. This is pretty much as low as I can go without doing a bunch of other major chassis fabrication, which I don't really want to get into at this moment. The annoying part is I did all this work to cut out the floor and everything, and it was literally just to gain a ½ inch. If the floor was just an inch higher, I wouldn't have had to cut it out, but I mean, it is what it is. I did have to completely gut the upper control arms, though. I didn't really have a choice for that because they need to be repositioned. The reason why we can't go much lower than this, at this height right now, we're at about 16 3/4 to the bottom of the wheel. Of course, there'll be a tire, and the lowest hanging point of the gas tank is roughly 16.5. If we were to set this car on the ground, straight on the wheel, the gas tank would be pretty much right on the ground. So, of course, with the thickness of the tire, you gain like about 2 inches probably with the profile tire that we're going to go with. So that'll bump the gas tank about 2 inches off the ground, which when the car is parked, that means it won't be obviously sitting on the ground, which I think will be just right because, like I said, when we were doing the front, I don't want this car to lay frame and basically be a dead paperweight if you can't air it up or get the car to run. So I want to be able to push it just in case the car dies for whatever reason. You got to push it off the road if you break down or whatever. Like I said, with the tire, it'll bump it up about 2 inches and it'll get everything just right off the ground. Just enough so we can keep it mobile. The other deciding factor for this height is the rear lower control arm. And at this height, it's currently sitting at about 15 inches. That's going to be cutting it really close. We can do a little bit of shaving on that control arm just to get a little more clearance, or if we have to, we'll get some aftermarket control arms that are a little more lower profile. They kind of tuck up in a little bit more. But that's still going to be off the ground on a flat surface. Now, if you're stuck aired out on the road where something's a little more uneven, that'll probably be dragging on the ground. So like I said, we'll probably have to just shave that a little bit or get another aftermarket control arm that has a little lower profile to it. So that way everything will be off the ground, hopefully. Next thing I have to do is notch the frame to clearance for the axle. And then once we do that, we'll be able to relocate the bump stops so they're functional again. And so we don't have a risk of the axle coming in contact with the frame at all, even if the car comes into a big bump and the suspension fully compresses. So lots more cutting and fish plating. We'll take the axle back out and we'll start doing that. If at any point just now you're wondering if I catch on fire sometimes, yeah, yeah, I do. All right, a lot's happened since I last did the record button. We got the frame all notched, plated, and welded up. I wasn't very good about filming the actual like cutting out of the rest of the bulkhead and all the other brackets it was kind of just boring stuff. It was a royal pain in the ass, and there wasn't really a good way to film it without constantly hitting the camera and stuff because there was a lot of just moving around and yeah, so we got both sides notched, just about 2 inches, 2-inch notch up. That'll allow clearance for the axle, and then we strengthen it up with some plates on inside and outside, and obviously fabricated that all. It's not the cleanest notch in the world, but I'm doing what we can with the tools that we have. So it came out pretty good though. Both sides are nice and solid, and that's what matters the most, to be honest. Along with the plating to add strength up here, we also made a nice strong surface that we can fab up new control arm mounts. We're gonna end up doing like a straight round bar from around this area here straight across, and then we'll use that to fabricate new upper control arm mounts. This was a royal pain in the butt. As you can see, a lot of the spot welds I had to drill out. All the spot welds in here that you can't see that's plated over. All through here, spot welds. I mean, this whole thing is just put together with spot welds. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. I'd be okay not doing that ever again. I have a feeling that maybe sometime in the future I will be. Got that done. That's a big check off the list. But now we got the real hard part done, and we can start figuring out these upper control arm mounts. Those should be pretty simple. I mean, we're not going to get too crazy with it. Basically, what we're going to do, pull a measurement from corner to corner, cut up a piece of tube, get that tacked in, and then we're going to mock up the axle once again, put the upper control arms, the stock ones, back on. I think I'm gonna have to trim those back about an inch or so. What I plan on doing is using Fox Body Mustang upper adjustable control arms because they're actually 1 inch shorter than the Thunderbird Fox Body rear control arms because of the wheelbase difference. So I think I can get some Mustang control arms, and that'll make up the difference to be able to come up with the control arm and give us a little bit more room for the mounts. But we're gonna do a simple mounting system, just 2 tabs on either side. We'll mock up the axle to get the upper control arms in the roundabout area, kind of get the pinion set roughly where we need it, and then we'll be able to temporarily mock up the upper control arms, set those at the correct angle that we want, at the ride height we want, make sure that that jives all well, and that'll show us our placement for our little tabs, what kind of angle they need to be at, and all that kind of stuff. So we're gonna get that piece of tube cut up, get that tacked in, and then go from there. All right, we got our mount leveled this way, the laser, and it matches the frame rails. And then we plumb bobbed it so that way it's forward and back on either side, and squared it off the holes for the lower control arm mounts. We got the axle in place, all mocked up. I also finished making the upper control arm mounts, the tabs for those. I also went and picked up a complete set of rear control arms on a Facebook Marketplace deal, so I got a really good deal on that. I got some actually some Maximum Motorsports, which is a big name in the Fox Body Mustang, Fox Body Thunderbird. Really good handling suspension. So I got a really good deal on some basically brand new Maximum Motorsports lower control arms and some adjustable upper control arms. I only paid like $200 for them. So I basically bought lower control arms and got some uppers for free. So it was a big plus. You have the axle in place, set at right height. It's in position side to side. It's in position front to back. The pinion angle is set correctly. So we should be good to tack in the upper control arm mounts. I'm basically going to sandwich the control arms themselves with the mounting tabs and then get those in position, tack those. And then what I want to do is I want to cycle the suspension and make sure that nothing's binding up or doing any weird kind of things. Make sure we get full range of motion. And if that all works out well, then we'll get those all burned in. And then we can move on to making the mounts for the airbags themselves. Also, side note, don't mind me, I got a cold right now, so I might be a little snazely and snozzly and all sorts of snuffed up and stuffed up. So let's get these mounts all tacked in, cycle the suspension, and if it's all good, burn it in. All right, last night we got the suspension all cycled up and down, made sure everything works, nothing was binding up, and nothing's doing anything crazy abnormal. It seems like it's good range of motion. The only issue that we ran into was, which I had a feeling was, since we're going so low with the car, the drive shaft is going to end up coming in contact with the floor up here. So at full compression, where I want the car to sit, the drive shaft ends up coming in contact with this part of the drive shaft tunnel. At some point, we're going to have to cut this out and refab up a new piece. Hopefully just big enough. It'll clear the drive shaft, but not too big that we can't fit this stock back seat in. So probably have to modify the stock seat a little bit, but hopefully not too much. I think what I also might do is modify the transmission mount. And if we can lower it about an inch, I think we can probably also help that drive shaft clearance issues. I might also kill two birds with one stone on that one, because I think in order to clear for the bench seat, I think I have to chop the transmission tunnel and lower that where the seat goes, so that way the seat doesn't sit too high. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work. We'll figure that out when we get there. But I do know for sure that we're going to have to modify the rear part of the transmission tunnel and then probably lower the transmission just a little bit. I think between those two, we'll have plenty of clearance for the drive shaft, and we'll be able to go pretty low with this car. So I'm pretty happy with how everything's working out so far. So I'm going to get the axle out of the way once again, get these brackets fully welded in, get the cross member all fully welded in, and then we can start figuring out the mounts for the bags. All right, we got all the upper control arm mounts and cross member, all that is burned in, and it's solid, it's permanent, and we got the axle back in after taking it out for the millionth time. I'm getting pretty damn quick at it though now. It now only takes me about 5 minutes to get the axle rolled back in and everything bolted back up, so that's not too bad. I guess that's the upside of having to take it out 40 million times. But we got one of the bags mocked up in the back just to kind of see what it looks like package-wise. Kind of get an idea of what we're going to have to do for the mounts and everything. This right now, the axle is at full compression, so the axle cannot go any farther up into the body. So my immediate concerns and challenges with mounting the bag this way are going to be some of the sheet metal bracing and all that stuff. In terms of mounting it to the control arm, that's going to be pretty easy. I have a piece of pipe that I'm going to cut to height-wise. Probably going to do a through bolt this way through the pipe, through this mount right here. And then it'll have a pad that the bag itself will sit on and bolt through. So that's pretty basic and simple. The top will be something similar to what we did with the front. Basically a 4-inch cup with an access port for bolts and airline. But when the bag is compressed like this, it is pretty wide. Now, it's not so tight once the bag is actually centered on the pad. It's not super tight, but it is rubbing against the frame right now. I think we're going to have to do, once we make these base pads for the bag itself, I think we have to put a little bit of an offset in it to bring the bag a little bit away from the inner frame rail and some of that sheet metal bracing. The brackets themselves will bring that coil down. It'll effectively push it away from that stuff as well. So between that and a little bit of offset in the brackets, I think we'll be able to take that bag and move it right off of that subframe rail and that bracketry, and we won't have any issues with it rubbing and potentially rubbing a hole in the bag over time. So we're going to get some measurements pulled up. I'm going to do a lot of brain thinking, and we're going to see if we can get something figured out and fabbed up and get the rear of this car sitting on some bags. All right, so like I said, we had to do a little bit of offsetting with the brackets in order to make it clear that inside part of the frame. But we kept it simple. Did a smaller tube on the bottom, so that way that will cup the control arm mount. And then for the top, did of course the mounting plate with the 2 bolts and then the fitting hole for the airline. Then I basically just took a 1/2-inch piece of that 4-inch tubing to space it up and give a spot for the offset plate. So everything is offset over 1 inch from center. And then I took another piece of 5/8 tall 4-inch pipe and tacked that on with the stud on the offset plate. And of course, you got your access holes for your bolts. And then I have to clearance this still for the airline to kind of make all that work. But this is just the mock-up stage, and of course, just tacked up. These will be all fully welded, cleaned up, painted up, and it'll look a lot nicer and be a lot more strong. So I was worried at first about having the offset mounts because I wasn't sure if this was going to be a lot of leverage to try to either break this stud or even try to like roll the bag almost. But I think it's going to be plenty. What we're going to do for the bottom is drill through the side and just have a through bolt that goes through the bottom pipe and the control arm mount so the bag can't come off. And of course for the top, it'll just be the single stud, and I'll have to put a plate up in the coil bucket with a smaller hole that this will go up to and bolt through. So it's a plain simple solution for a small problem that we had. And so I just got to make another one of these and we'll have bag mounts for the rear. These are my templates that I have for the base plates. They just look like a bunch of happy guys or surprised guys ready to do some work. This is the mounting plate that goes from the bracket to the airbag, clearance holes for the airline, the 2 bolt holes. That's just the hole for the stud in the front, so that I don't need that on the rear. And then this is the offset one that gives you clearance to get to the airline and the holes, and it shifts the bracket over 1 inch. So I'm gonna get a couple of those cut out of this 3/16 plate. Then we're gonna get our slivers of our 4-inch pipe cut up. Get our base pipe for our bottom bracket cut up out of this 3-inch schedule 80 maybe. I don't know. This pipe was just chilling around my house, so gotta love finding scraps around the house. All right, we got both bag brackets all fabbed up. Everything is mocked up in there. I'm running the axle up and down just to see what we have for clearances. Without any bump stops or the drive shaft or anything like that, bags allow the axle to go all the way up till it bottoms out on the cross member, and the cross member right here is what it was a limiting factor with where the pinion snub bracket is on the axle. So there's no issues with clearances on the bag mounts. Not too tall. Again, they let the bag fully compress, which is good. What I'm doing next is I have one bolt in the drive shaft just to keep it in place to see where it is, and I've been running it up and down to see where, basically how far up we can go with the axle, how low we can bring the car down essentially, before the drive shaft comes into contact with anything. And drive shaft clearances are the problems is the next. Drive shaft clearances are one of the next projects. Yo, get out of here. And drive shaft clearances are the next problem that we're going to have to deal with. In the floor, you can see how it arcs up right here. There's kind of like a body brace underneath. That's very, very close. It's not hitting yet. But where it's very, very close is how the rear seat dips down like this. So I don't think it'll be an issue. What I'm going to do is I think I'm just going to chop off the top of this and basically bring this back level. And then we'll have to fab up a new piece out of sheet metal when we fab up a new piece over the axle. You gotta do it quick before you can think about what you're doing. You can see where the drive shaft was making some contact. It was rubbing up in here, and also it was rubbing up the counterweights on the drive shaft. So now we have plenty of room. I'll make a quick cap for that later on. One thing I'm not sure about is I might have to also clearance up here. I'm not going this high up with the axle. I just want to make sure that I could have all that clearance. But right now I think the drive shaft is hitting the cross brace right here, which could use some trimming. But that sits just as low as this part of the floor here. So I might trim that too. Not sure yet. Another thing I want to do is test fit. Another thing I want to do is test fit the front bench seat, because as you guys know, I want to keep this a front bench seat car, as the 59 was. Obviously, the Thunderbird had bucket seats, so the transmission tunnel is pretty high up. So I'm not sure if the bench seat's going to end up sitting up too high, and we're going to have to chop that and lower it, or modify the seat, or both. So right now, as we're thinking about the transmission tunnel with the drive shaft clearance and all that fun stuff, I also want to test fit the bottom part of the bench seat, see where that puts us at the driving position. That'll also kind of determine what we end up doing with that whole transmission tunnel, because as of right now, it'd be beneficial to cut that whole thing out, raise it. But if we have to lower that portion of the transmission tunnel for the bench seat, then we might only do part of it. So it's kind of like I got to check 15 things to see what direction we go with to finish up the rear, and it's just kind of figuring out a bunch of things at once. So right now we're going to test fit the bench seat and see what it looks like. This thing is still old and crusty and gross because it sat in this car for 30 years in the woods. So eventually we'll break this down and recover it and make it look nice. But for now, this is what we got to deal with. I can already tell this is going to be way too high, but we'll block it up and see anyway. Alright, I'd say we have some work to do, because this is not even close. But this is the first time I've even had the seat in here, so you can imagine it, like... And unfortunately, the column does not tilt, so we might have to modify the column mounting to see if we can get that to come up, as well as lower the seat too, somehow, so... We learned a couple things with that test fit. Definitely have to go lower with the bench seat, which I think we can do that with a combination of notching the framework of the bench seat to get it to sit up and over that transmission tunnel, and then trimming this seat's bulkhead. While I really want to go like super low with this car, I'm also not really willing to sacrifice one of the main reasons why I wanted to build this car was have a bench seat cruiser. So you kind of have to compromise in certain areas when doing a build like this, and unfortunately I don't think trimming the transmission tunnel anymore is that much of an option, because we'd have to raise it and it would raise that bench seat more. So I don't think that's going to work for us. But the way it is now, we were able to get it pretty low. So I think one option is I'll be able to take the transmission mount and either fab up a new one and lower it about an inch. Because with that rubber isolator right there, we should be able to gain about an inch, inch and a half with the transmission coming down. And that'll give us more drive shaft clearance, and we don't have to worry about the transmission tunnel up in that area. And if we have to, then we'll be able to lower that transmission tunnel just a little bit to make that bench seat work. Because like I said, I want this as a bench seat cruiser. That's one of the main reasons why I'm building it. So that's kind of one thing I'm not really wanting to compromise on in this. I'm determined to make that feature work with the big steering wheel and all that stuff. So that's something that we got to work around. And with test fitting that, now we know. And we can kind of move on and get the rear suspension buttoned up. All right, so now we're going to be modifying the transmission cross member to get our driveline angle of the transmission angled down a little bit and hopefully pull that drive shaft off the floor a little bit, since we're not wanting to notch the floor. Can't really modify this mount. This is like the actual rubber mount that mounts the transmission to the cross member. This plate is turbo coupe specific, so it attaches this mount to the actual T5 that's in the car right now, because the T5, I have a spare right here. This plate bolts to this, and then this mount bolts to that, which bolts to the cross member. I can modify this plate here, but I can only drop about 3/8 of an inch, and I don't have a mill with me, which would be the best way to do it. But because this isolator sits in there, and there's only about 3/8 of an inch before the back of that isolator hits the transmission itself. So the best option now is modifying the cross member itself. I can't drop the cross member because these go into bolt holes instead of going up into the frame this way, where I could space it off the frame that way. Going down, I have through bolts through bushings, and you can't physically lower that without cutting it off the body side. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this 1/4 inch plate to remake this slotted hole in a stronger plate with kind of like a U-shaped channel. We're going to cut into this and basically make a plate that'll weld in there, stiffen all back up, give us our slotted hole for the mounting stud, and effectively lowering the transmission, and we should be good to go. As I'm sitting here cutting this piece apart, this transmission cross member, I realized I made this little pocket, so it's like a flip pocket, so that way it'll essentially replace this piece I'm cutting out here, and it'll be a solid mount solution to drop the transmission 3/4 of an inch. I realized when I was cutting this part, I could have simply just taken the piece I'm cutting out and flipped it upside down. But hey, this is 1/4 inch. That's 1/8 inch steel. That is stronger than that. It'll make me feel better. All right, we're gonna test fit that before we fully weld it. We got it tacked in. I did notice before I started when I was mocking it up, when I cut this other piece out, it actually had about an 1/8 inch rake upwards in the front. So I was sure to shim that up. So we should be good, but I want to double check it and get it test fit and make sure that we'll have the clearance. I don't have to lower this anymore, lower the transmission anymore, and just make sure that this jives for what we're trying to do. All right, the transmission mount, dropped the transmission plenty, and actually almost a little too much, because right now the output of the transmission is sitting at about 3.5 degrees down, and from what I've read, you don't want to go more than 3 before you start getting driveline vibrations. So no big deal. What we'll do is just put a small spacer in between the transmission and the transmission mount, and it'll bring that up just a little bit, and it'll dial in that drive shaft angle. But we have plenty of drive shaft clearance. I'll probably just take a little hammer to this section here. It's got plenty of clearance, but I just want to make sure that it's got more than enough. We'll get this all welded up, reinstalled, and then we'll keep working on the back. Transmission mount is all painted up and installed. That worked out great. I did have to use a little shim, about 3/16 washer, just to get that drive shaft angle dialed in to where I wanted it. So next I made these big washers. Since we're utilizing that spring perch for our airbag mount, we need something that the airbag mount can bolt to. So this washer is going to get welded up in there, and then our stud will be able to bolt to that, and that will retain the bag on the upper portion. The bottom portion of the bag, we're just doing a simple through bolt this way. It's going to go sideways through the bottom of the airbag mount, through this piece on the control arm to the other side, and that'll make it so that way that bag can't come off this way. So then it'll be solidly mounted in between the two. So we're going to get these burned in, make sure it works with the bag mounts, and then we need to make some clearance for the air line, which is just going to be drilling a hole in that spring perch right next to where these are mounted. So that way we have a spot for our airline to come up through and into the trunk area, and we can plumb it to the tank. After that, we need to figure out mounts for bump stops. So let's get these burned in, and we can move on to the bump stops. All right, next up is figuring out the bump stops. We're going to be using these energy suspension universal kind of cone style bump stops. There'll be plenty for what we're going to be using them for. Basically, we have to attach the bump stop to the subframe, and then what I want to do is, since these are cone shaped, it's only one small point of contact on the axle itself. So I also want to build a little pad that gets welded to the axle that the bump stop can come in contact with, and it just be a little bit more of a contact patch, a little more surface area for that bump stop to hit. Really, we're gonna do a simple design, basically like a U bracket that comes down, over, and back up, or maybe something that comes in more of like a V shape where it comes down at an angle, which might offer a little more surface area to weld to on the subframe, and then come over a little bit, offer a pad for the bolt to go through, or the stud, and then come back up in another kind of 45-degree angle. I haven't decided yet, but I'm kind of leaning towards the latter, just because there might be a little bit more surface area for that bracket to get welded to, and then we can put a little mini gusset in the middle just to kind of strengthen everything up. All right, we got the rear suspension all done, all fabbed up, fully welded, painted, cleaned up. I plug welded all the holes that were left over from drilling out the spot welds, grinded those clean. Got the bump stop pads welded to the axle. Got the rear bags installed and the air lines ran. So that way we should be able to test it out when we get the axle in. I had to drill some holes for access to the top of the bolts for the airbag mounts, and then for the air line to come up through. I put this rubber fuel line around it, around the air line, just so it would be like a chafe protection coming through the sheet metal. I'll probably still put a little grommet right there for both sides. Like I said, a little bit of chafe protection on the air lines. Once I fab up the cover over the axle, that's probably where the air tank's going to mount, with the compressors on maybe on either side, or at least in that general area. So the air lines should be enough just to go plumbing wherever that's got to go. So got the airbags installed, went through and painted everything just so it would not rust. So we're just about ready to put the axle in for, fingers crossed, the last time. Easier said than done, but I'm hoping this will be the last time that we put the axle in, because I've taken it in and out probably, I don't know, 20 times in this whole process of trying to get this whole rear suspension all fabbed up. So we're gonna get the axle installed again, hopefully the last time, and then we're gonna hook up the air system temporarily with an air compressor and make sure it all works. And if it does, then we can button up this project. All right, we got the axle back in. We got the car sitting on its own weight on the bump stops. We got our temporary air supply ready to go and hooked up for the compressor to build some air. And we're gonna see if the rear suspension works. It works. So sick. And just like that, the rear and the front of this car have a complete air ride system. Well, okay, they have the hard part of the air ride system done. We still have to, of course, wire up all the solenoids and the air management, plumb the supply tank and the air compressors and all that stuff. But the hard part is done, all the fabrication. This was a ton of work for the rear to get the rear of the car on air ride. And as low as I wanted to go. We, of course, didn't go as low as I truly wanted to go, because I didn't want to risk the super tight tolerances. And with poly bushings and bump stops and axle wrap, you start to get a lot of movement with the axle, and I wanted enough room between the cross members and everything and the drive shaft tunnel to make sure that when we are driving this car, and we plan on driving it hard and far and all over the place, so hold on. It requires enough room for a lot of suspension movement. Basically just a lot of preventative measures to make sure that if the bump stops do compress, they won't hit anything catastrophic. But this is a huge win. It's a huge step in this build. Other than putting the body on the chassis, the rear suspension has been the biggest hurdle that we've had to get over so far. It was a ton of work, to be completely honest. It was a lot more work than the front. So, I mean, we had to notch the frame, we had to completely redesign and make new upper control arm mounts, we had to make custom bump stops. We really had to touch everything in the rear of this car. I mean, even down to making custom transmission drop members to make sure we have enough drive shaft clearances. But all that hard work paid off, and as you just saw, the whole car airs up and down. Now, in the last clip, you saw it air up and down as the whole car. That's just because I have it all temporarily plumbed. The lines to the front are longer than the rear, and it's kind of tied together with 1/4-inch line and everything like that. And then there's a small line with a small compressor feeding the whole system. So the rear bags had to air up first before the pressure transferred to the front and aired up the front. And there's more weight in the front, so the front airs down quicker than the rear, all because it's going with one inlet and one outlet for a temporary setup, just to make sure it all works. Once we get the whole management system and the air supply system all wired up and plumbed up, each corner is going to have its own solenoid and its own air supply from the tank. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the car will air up at least twice as fast in the rear, and the front, I believe it'll be way quicker. It should be as quick as the rear. And like I said, the rear should be just about twice as fast as it is now, because there will be its own supply to each corner and its own exhaust for each corner. So I'm super stoked how this is coming together. I can't wait to get the management all set up and be able to do all this from the flip of a switch or a couple switches. Oh yeah, and big announcement. So there's this thing called the Overcrest Rally. It takes place in different parts of the U.S. each year. Last year it was in the Ozarks. The year before, I believe it was in Arkansas. This year it's in the Driftless region. So that's Wisconsin, Iowa, that Midwest area, which we're in Connecticut. So that's about 18 to 20 hour drive for us. I think about 1,200 miles or something, if I remember correctly. The significance of this rally is you have to apply to get in. Now, last year I applied with the Mustang, and I didn't get in. I don't think the car was unique enough. The cars that do get accepted, there are a lot of old 911 Porsches, old Ferraris. It's basically a plethora of a bunch of different cool cars, and it's a bunch of gearheads getting together and doing basically a 3-day driving event. Guys who run it map it all out ahead of time. But you get a co-driver and a map, and you got to basically navigate through this set course, I guess you could say. I don't know, for lack of a better term, but this year we applied with the 59 and we got in. So now we have to finish this car by June 20th and then road trip it 18 hours, 1,200 miles to Wisconsin so we could do this 3-day driving event and then drive it all the way home. So my goal is to get it done by May, so that way I can put a ton of miles on it, figure out all the bugs, get it all sorted out. Again, I'm still keeping this as a budget build. I don't want to spend more than $5,000 to get the car running and driving. However, once we get to that point where it's running and driving, you can use it as a regular hot rod to bring to shows or whatever. We will be diving a little deeper into like a lot of the maintenance items that'll make it more reliable for a road trip. And that's where we might spend a little more money. Like, we're gonna probably do a complete brake overhaul. Like, right now the brakes are fine, they're just used. But for the trip, I think I would like to do a complete brake overhaul. Really just go through all the maintenance items that you don't want to have to fix on the side of the road when you go on a long road trip. So super excited for that. Since I found out about the event, it's been something that I've wanted to do for so long, and we finally got accepted to join it. So there's a lot of really cool cars going. John Ludwig from Ludwig's Garage, he's building a Corvair right now for that specific rally. I'll put his channel right down here. You can check that out. It's pretty cool. But there you have it. Cars on air. Big thing checked off the list. And now we have a big event to get the car ready and finished for. So no pressure at all. Just a couple weeks to get it all done. But it'll be a lot of late nights after work to hammer down, really get this dialed in. And I'm just super stoked about the whole project. I'm really excited how the car's coming out. Really excited to get to go to this cool event, do it with buddies, and make some new friends. So if you guys want to support what we're doing, feel free to hit that subscribe button. It's free. It helps the channel grow. Other than that, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next one.